The dusty wooden sign creaked in the Texas wind, its painted letters faded by years of sun and neglect. Retired police dogs for sale. The words hung there like a broken promise swaying gently against the chain that held it to the old fence post. Below the sign, the Harris County Sheriff's Yard stretched out in the afternoon heat, a place that should have been quiet, forgotten routine. But today, something heavy settled over the gravel lot, something that made the air feel thick despite the dry wind cutting across the open space. Metal cages lined both sides of the yard in perfect military rows. 12 cages total, but only 4 were occupied. Inside them sat German shepherds, their fur grayed at the muzzles, their eyes carrying the weight of years most people would never understand. These were not ordinary dogs. Once they had been legends, heroes in fur and muscle who sprinted into danger without hesitation, who placed their bodies between bullets and the officers they loved. Now they sat behind bars, shoulders slumped, breath slow and shallow, waiting for strangers to decide their fate. The annual K-9 retirement auction, a tradition in Harris County held every spring when budget cuts forced hard decisions and aging service dogs needed new homes. It was supposed to be simple, routine, a quiet transfer of animals no longer fit for duty. But the moment the gates opened and people began filing into the yard, that illusion shattered. A man in a worn denim vest walked past the first cage, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He stopped, squinted at the dog inside, then moved on without a word. Behind him, a woman in dusty boots leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him shake his head. They weren't looking at heroes. They were appraising livestock, judging value, calculating cost versus utility. Inside the first cage, a German shepherd lifted his head slowly. His name was Ghost. His eyes, deep brown and impossibly sad, tracked every person who passed. He watched them with a kind of hope that felt desperate, fragile, like glass about to shatter. His ears flicked forward each time footsteps approached his body, tensing, as if preparing to recognize someone, anyone who mattered. But no familiar scent came. No voice he knew, just strangers muttering judgments. This one looks strong. Too old for my needs. Probably has issues after all those years. Their words sliced through the quiet like dull knives, careless and cold. They spoke as though the dogs couldn't hear, couldn't understand, couldn't feel. But Ghost understood. So did the dog in the cage beside him. Ace, a powerfully built shepherd with scars along his front legs and a patch of fur that had never grown back after a warehouse fire years ago. He pressed his nose between the metal bars, nostrils flaring as he tested the air for someone that wasn't there. His breathing came in short, anxious bursts. Every few seconds, he shifted his weight from paw to paw, unable to settle, unable to relax. The cage felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. In the third cage, Rex sat perfectly still. His posture was military precise, the way he'd been trained. Back straight, head high, eyes forward. But his ears lay flat against his skull, and his tail was tucked so tightly beneath him it was almost invisible. Rex had always been the tracker, the one with the nose that could find anyone anywhere, no matter how long the trail had gone cold. Now he couldn't find the one person who mattered most. And then there was Thunder. The fourth cage held a dog who had once been fearless. Thunder was the kind of K-9 officers talked about in hushed, reverent tones. The dog who ran into burning buildings without hesitation. The one who pulled wounded men to safety while bullets tore through the air around him. The dog who never ever showed fear. But now Thunder sat trembling in the corner of his cage, his body pressed against the metal as though trying to disappear into it. His eyes were red-rimmed wet. And yes, there were tears, real tears glistening in the sunlight, slipping down his muzzle and dripping onto the concrete below. A man in a faded baseball cap stopped in front of Thunder's cage. He stared for a long moment, then leaned toward the auctioneer standing nearby. "Never seen dogs cry like that," the man muttered. The auctioneer, a thick-shouldered man in his 50s named Brennan, barely glanced up from his clipboard. "They'll be fine once they're bought," he said flatly. "People get too sentimental about these animals." But even Brennan didn't sound convinced. His voice carried a hollowness, a forced indifference that didn't quite land. He looked away from the cages quickly, as though eye contact might crack something inside him he wasn't prepared to deal with. Across the yard near the main gate, officers from surrounding counties stood with their arms crossed. Some wore uniforms, others plain clothes, but every single one of them had the same expression: uncomfortable, guilty, eyes that wouldn't meet the T's, wouldn't meet each other. They shifted their weight, checked their phones, stared at the ground. No one wanted to acknowledge what was happening here. No one wanted to name it, because this wasn't a retirement ceremony. It was something else, something uglier. The auctioneer stepped onto the wooden platform at the center of the yard and tapped his clipboard loudly against the podium. The sharp crack of wood on wood cut through the murmurs. "All right, folks," Brennan announced, his voice carrying across the lot. "We'll start the bidding in just a few minutes. Please take your time looking over the maze and decide which ones interest you. Once they're sold, they become your responsibility. The county holds no liability after transfer of ownership." A hush settled over the crowd. Not a peaceful quiet, a painful one. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. One of the dogs barked suddenly, sharp, desperate. The sound startled several people, hands flying to chest, feet stumbling backward. It was Ace. He pushed his face between the bars of his cage, scanning the crowd with frantic eyes. Looking, searching. When he found no one he recognized, he let out a low, trembling cry that made even the auctioneer pause mid-sentence. Another cage rattled as thunder shifted inside his chain collar, clinking against the metal. His eyes were impossibly human in their sorrow, red and wet and pleading. The scene didn't feel like an auction. It felt like abandonment, like betrayal. And though no one said it aloud, everyone standing in that yard could feel it pressing down on them like the Texas heat. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The sound of boots on gravel cut through the tension, heavy, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. Heads turned toward the main gate as a patrol vehicle rolled to a stop just outside the fence. The engine cut off. The door opened. Officer Garrett Blackwood stepped out into the sunlight. He was 35 years old with the kind of face that carried more weight than years alone could account for. Sharp jawline shadowed by stubble, he hadn't bothered to shave that morning. Eyes the color of slate hard and focused, the eyes of a man who had seen things most people only heard about on the news. He moved with purpose, each step measured, controlled, but there was something coiled beneath the surface. Tension, anger barely held in check. Garrett paused at the entrance to the yard, his gaze sweeping across the scene. The cages, the dogs, the people circling like vultures. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists at his sides, then relaxed, then curled again. He had seen these auctions before. Every year the county held them. Every year retired K-9 units were quietly sold off to whoever wanted them. But this time something felt different. Wrong. The air carried a tension he couldn't name, a quiet dread that seemed to cling to every cage, every breath. He scanned the yard, noticing the officers standing stiffly along the fence. He knew some of them, had worked with them, trained with them. Usually they greeted him, asked about his K-9 work, exchanged stories, joked about department politics. But today they looked through him, past him, as if they were waiting for something to happen, something they didn't want to be a part of but couldn't stop. Garrett crossed the gravel lot slowly, boots crunching with each step. The sound of barking filled the air. Whining, metal rattling. To most people it was just noise, chaos. But to Garrett it was language. A language he understood better than most humans understood each other. He approached the center of the yard where auctioneer Brennan stood reading through his clipboard with the casual detachment of a man checking a grocery list. Blackwood Brennan greeted without looking up. "Didn't expect to see you here." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I heard some of the retired units from my district were being auctioned today." Brennan finally lifted his eyes, but his expression remained flat, Almost forced. Budget cuts. Policy updates. You know the drill. Garrett didn't respond. His attention had already shifted. To the dogs. Their posture. Their expressions. Their breathing. Years of K9 work had given him a sixth sense for reading distress. And what he saw here wasn't normal anxiety. It was heartbreak. He moved toward the nearest cage, his boots slowing as he approached. The dog inside stared at him with wooden-shade, trembling eyes. Garrett stopped. His breath caught in his throat. "Ghost," he whispered. The German shepherd pressed his face against the bars, choking on a soft cry that shattered Garrett's composure. Ghost. The name echoed in Garrett's mind like a punch to the gut. This dog shouldn't be here. He was supposed to be living peacefully, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from cages and strangers and auctions. Not locked up awaiting sale like equipment no one wanted anymore. Garrett knelt in front of the cage, gripping the cold metal bars. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, his throat tightening. "What are you doing here?" Ghost whimpered low and broken and pushed his paw through the gap between the bars. Garrett held it gently, his hand trembling. The dog's pad was rough-worn from years of service. Scars crisscrossed the fur along his legs. Old injuries, old battles, old sacrifices. Behind Garrett, a pair of officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Deputy Callahan, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, stepped forward cautiously. Blackwood Callahan said quietly, "Decisions like these, they came from higher up." Garrett's stomach dropped. Higher up. He stood slowly, his hand still resting on Ghost's paw, and turned to scan the lineup of cages again. His eyes moved from one dog to the next, and that's when he saw them. Ace, Rex, Thunder, all four of them, together. The realization hit Garrett like a freight train. His vision blurred for a second. His chest tightened. These weren't just any retired K9 units. These were Donovan Thorne's dogs. Van's dogs. His partner. His brother. The man who had died 3 years ago, saving Garrett's life. The memory slammed into him without warning. 3 years earlier, a warehouse on the east side of the county. Darkness, the smell of oil and rust. Reports of armed traffickers hiding inside, moving product through the back channels, using the abandoned building as a staging ground. Garrett and Van had been dispatched with their K9 units. 4 dogs. Ghost, Ace, Rex, Thunder. The best team in the district. Garrett remembered kneeling beside the dogs in the parking lot, checking their harnesses, adjusting their vests. Van had stood beside Ghost, running his hand over the shepherd's head affectionately. "You ready, boy?" Van had whispered. Ghost's tail had thumped once against the ground. He was always ready. The team moved in quietly, shadows slipping through shadows. Thunder led the advance, nose low, ears, high alert to every molecule in the air. Ace flanked left, scanning for explosives. Rex stayed ahead of Van, his instincts razor sharp. They were more than trained units. They were brothers, partners, heroes. Halfway through the warehouse, a sudden clatter echoed from a back room. Garrett had signaled the team to stop. Thunder froze. Ace's ears shot forward. Rex stiffened, growling low. Then the gunfire erupted. One bullet struck Van before anyone could react. Garrett still remembered the sound, the sickening thud, the sharp inhalation, the way Van's body collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Van, Garrett had shouted, diving toward him. But before Garrett reached him, Ghost was already there. The shepherd threw himself on top of Van, shielding his handler's body with his own. Teeth bared, snarling with a fury Garrett had never seen. Thunder and Ace lunged forward too, pushing back the attackers long enough for backup to arrive. Garrett had Van's blood on his hands when the paramedics came. He remembered Van's trembling voice, barely a whisper. "Take care of them, Garrett." Van wasn't talking about the other officers. He was talking about the noise. Ghost had nuzzled Van's cheek, whining softly as the life faded from his partner's eyes. Garrett had never heard a sound like that whine. Not before, not since. Van died on the way to the hospital, and everything changed after that night. Garrett blinked, dragging himself back to the present. His heart pounded. His hands shook. The dogs weren't just units he knew. They were the last remnants of Van's legacy, heroes who had saved Garrett's life, Van's life, countless others. Each one carried scars from that night, physical scars, emotional scars, scars Garrett had helped them heal through months of rehabilitation and training. And now here they were, locked in cages, sold like property, treated like they never mattered. Garrett felt anger swirl inside him, thick and suffocating. How could the county erase everything these dogs had done? How could they bury the truth of their service, their sacrifice? He trusted me, Garrett whispered under his breath. Van trusted me to protect them. Ghost pressed his paw harder against the bars as though hearing the promise. Garrett turned sharply toward Deputy Callahan. Why is he here? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Callahan shifted uncomfortably. Blackwood, look, these decisions, they didn't come from us. I don't care where they came from, Garrett snapped. Ghost was Van's dog. He was supposed to be with a foster family. Safe, not in a cage waiting to be sold. Callahan glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. Orders came from higher up, he repeated. County board, budget issues, new policies. Garrett's stomach twisted. New policies. He scanned the lineup again, his mind racing. Ghost, Ace, Rex, Thunder. All four of Van's team. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. Someone wanted these dogs gone. The realization settled over him like ice water. This isn't a retirement auction, Garrett whispered to himself. This is a betrayal. He stepped toward this next cage. Ace rose to his feet slowly, his body trembling. The powerful shepherd who once charged into drug raids without fear now looked broken. Ace pressed his forehead against the bars, releasing a low, broken whine that made the crowd fall silent. Garrett moved closer. Easy, boy, he whispered. Ace let out a soft cry and pawed at the bars, his claws scraping desperately. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes, catching the sunlight. The sight hit Garrett like a hammer to the chest. Ace had never shown fear, not once in all the years Garrett had known him. Seeing him like this felt wrong on every level. Then, as if drawn by some invisible pull, the other dogs followed. Rex pressed his muzzle between the bars of his cage, whining deep in his throat. Thunder started pacing in small, panicked circles, looking at Garrett with pleading eyes. One by one, every dog in that row began reacting. Not just to Garrett's presence, to something deeper. Recognition. Memory. The bond they had shared with Van now transferred desperately to the man Van had trusted most. People stopped whispering. The auctioneer lowered his clipboard. Even the officers who had been avoiding eye contact looked stunned. It was as if the dogs had recognized not just Garrett, but the truth behind why they were there. And they were begging him to see it too. Garrett swallowed hard, moving slowly from cage to cage. Each dog nudged him, reached for him, cried for him. Some pressed their bodies against the bars so hard the metal rattled. Others rested their heads low, ears flattened, as though apologizing for something they didn't understand. Ghost, still holding Garrett's gaze from across the yard, let out a howl, a long, haunting sound that made every person freeze. It wasn't a howl of aggression, it was grief. Deep, aching grief that no animal should ever feel. Garrett felt the weight of dozens of emotions crashing into him all at once. Anger, heartbreak, confusion, guilt. He had known these dogs for years, trained with them, deployed with them, watched them save lives again and again. These weren't just K-9 units, they were family. And watching them reach for him like this, crying, shaking, begging, meant they had been suffering long before this auction began. He placed a hand on Ace's cage, his voice cracking. What did they do to you? The dogs whimpered as if answering him. And Garrett knew with chilling certainty this wasn't just a retirement auction. This was a cry for help. The sudden wave of emotion sweeping through the yard had left everyone unsettled. The dogs' cries echoed against the old wooden buildings, their trembling bodies pressed against metal bars as they watched Garrett move among them. Something about their desperation shook even the toughest men in the crowd. But auctioneer Brennan, determined to keep things business as usual, cleared his throat loudly, snapping the tension like a brittle twig. All right, folks, He announced, stepping onto the platform. Before we begin, I need to lay out the rules. Listen carefully. Garrett turned toward him, jaw tightening. He already knew he wouldn't like what he was about to hear. Brennan raised his clipboard and read in a clipped, emotionless tone. Rule number 1. All sales are final. Once a dog is purchased, ownership is transferred immediately and the county holds no liability. The crowd murmured. A few people nodded, but Garrett felt his stomach twist. These weren't pieces of furniture. They were living partners who had risked their lives for years. Rule number 2, Brennan continued. Dogs will not be reassigned to former handlers or departments. No exceptions. Garrett froze. That rule didn't exist in any official retirement policy he'd ever seen. Ace whimpered behind him, sensing the spike of anger that rose inside Garrett like wildfire. Ghost barked once, loud and sharp, directed at the platform, as if he understood the cruelty behind the words. Brennan pressed on. Rule number 3. Medical records will not be disclosed. Buyers assume all financial responsibility for care. A ripple of discomfort swept through the crowd. No medical records, no history, no transparency. That was dangerous, irresponsible, and deeply suspicious. Garrett stepped forward. Where do these rules come from, he demanded. Brennan avoided his eyes. County directive. Which county official signed off on this? Blackwood, Brennan snapped. It's not up for debate. Garrett clenched his fists. The dogs reacted instantly, barking louder, pacing frantically, rattling their cages in agitation. People began backing away from the front row, unsettled by how intensely the animals responded to the tension. Moving on, Brennan said, raising his voice over the noise. Rule number 4. If a dog is not purchased by the end of the day, it will be transferred to other facilities for processing. Garrett's blood ran cold. The crowd fell silent. Nobody needed clarification. Processing didn't mean training. It meant disposal. Ghost let out a sound that was not a bark, not a howl. It was heartbreak. Garrett stepped onto the platform, eyes blazing. You can't do this. These dogs served this county. They saved officers' lives. Brennan finally looked at him, and for a split second, guilt flickered in his eyes. But it vanished quickly. Rules are rules, Officer Blackwood. Now step back. Garrett didn't move. Because one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't an auction. It was an execution disguised as paperwork. Garrett didn't step back. He stood firm on the wooden platform, his boots planted as if rooted to the earth itself. Brennan stiffened, clearly not expecting resistance. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. Something dangerous and electric hung in the air. Officer Blackwood, Brennan warned, his voice tightening. You're disrupting a lawful county process. Garrett's eyes burned with fury he could no longer suppress. Lawful, he repeated, his voice low and shaking with emotion. What's lawful about hiding medical records? What's lawful about forbidding reassignment to handlers? What's lawful about threatening to process dogs who served this county for years? The crowd went silent. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The dogs, every single one, went still. Brennan tried to maintain control. He lifted his clipboard like a shield. If you cannot behave professionally, I will ask you to leave. No, Garrett snapped. You're going to answer me. Ghost barked sharply from his cage, the sound echoing across the yard like a call to arms. Ace rose on his hind legs, paws against the bars, whining anxiously. The other dogs followed their distress, rising in waves. People stepped back from the cages, uneasy, as the animals reacted not with aggression, but with raw desperation, as though pleading for Garrett to keep fighting. Deputy Callahan approached cautiously. Garrett, he said quietly, this isn't the place. Let it go. Garrett spun toward him. You want me to let it go? These dogs ran into gunfire for us. They tracked missing children in storms. They saved officers who wouldn't be alive today without them. And now you want to sell them to random bidders like old equipment? Callahan looked down, unable to respond. Brennan slammed the clipboard on the podium. The dogs are county property, Blackwood. You of all people should understand protocol. Garrett's voice rose. Protocol doesn't involve betrayal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A heavy silence followed, thick and suffocating. Brennan leaned forward, lowering his voice into a cold, authoritative growl. This is bigger than you, bigger than your emotions. The decision is made. Step down. Garrett took a step closer instead. No, not until you tell me who ordered these rules. That information is classified. Classified? Garrett's laugh came out hollow and bitter. Since when does a retirement auction involve classified orders? Brennan's jaw twitched. He didn't answer, and that alone was an answer. Garrett lowered his voice, but the quiet intensity made every word land like a hammer. Who are you protecting, and why are you hiding what happened to these dogs before they were brought here? Brennan swallowed hard, his facade cracking for a split second. Before he could recover, Ghost let out a long, anguished howl. The other dogs joined him. The yard erupted in a chorus of heartbreak. Even hardened officers felt their throats tighten. Garrett pointed toward the cages. Look at them, he said. Does that look like retirement to you? Does that look like dogs ready to be processed? These animals are terrified of something, and they're begging us to see it. Brennan hesitated. For the first time since the auction began, he didn't seem so sure of himself. But instead of backing down, he lifted the clipboard again and snapped, "Bidding begins now." The gavel struck, and in that moment, Garrett made a decision that would change everything. Before anyone could place a bid, before the auctioneer could call out the first dog's number, Garrett's voice cut through the yard like thunder. "Stop the auction!" Every head turned. The gavel froze midair. Garrett stepped to the edge of the platform, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. The officers, the dogs. His jaw was set, his eyes fierce. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a promise that could not be broken. "I will take all of them." The yard exploded into chaos, gasps, shouts, phones raised to record. Brennan stared stunned into silence. "All of them," Garrett repeated louder now. "Every single one of these dogs leaves with me today." The auctioneer sputtered. That's impossible. You can't." "I can," Garrett said. "And I will." People leaned in. Officers whispered among themselves. Even the box fell silent as if holding their breath. Brennan found his voice. "Blackwood, do you understand that because the woes, the liability, I don't care about," Garrett said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I don't care about rules written to hide corruption. All I care about is saving the lives of the house who once saved ours." Ghost barked, once sharp and triumphant. For the first time since the auction began, hope flickered in the eyes of every dog. Garrett looked at the cages, his voice breaking. "You're coming home. All of you." For a long, suspended moment, the entire yard froze. Then the reaction began. "No, absolutely not," Brennan sputtered. "That is not how this works." Officers, stop him. Two deputies stepped forward, hands out, trying to reason. Garrett once said, "Don't make this harder. You can't interfere with county property." But Garrett didn't back down. If anything, he stepped closer to the cages, positioning himself between the dogs and the advancing officers. "County property," he repeated, voice trembling with anger. "These dogs here aren't property. They're heroes." Ace barked loudly behind him as if agreeing. Blackwood, another deputy, said firmer this time, "Stand down right now." The crowd whispered anxiously. Several people raised their phones to record. The tension thickened like fog rolling over the yard. Garrett clenched his fists. "I'm not standing down. I'm standing with them." The deputies exchanged a look, then took another step forward. And that's when everything changed. Ghost let out a sudden piercing bark. Not aggressive, not angry, a warning. Ace barked next, then Rex. Within seconds, every dog in every cage rose to their feet. The yard filled with the synchronized sound of claws scraping metal, dogs stepping forward in unison, pressing their bodies against the bars, their eyes locked on the officers moving toward Garrett. The deputies froze mid-step. "What's happening?" one whispered. Then it escalated. Ghost shoved his shoulder against the cage door hard. The latch rattled violently. Ace followed, throwing his weight into the bars. Rex dug his claws under the bottom edge, trying to lift it. Thunder pushed with everything he had. Cage after cage erupted with desperate movement. Not attacking, not panicking, protecting. They were trying to break out, not to escape, but to form a barrier around Garrett. Garrett's breath caught. "Easy, boys," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "I'm right here." But the dogs didn't stop. Their bodies pushed, pressed, slammed. Some wedged their paws through the gaps as if reaching for him. Others howled a haunting sound that filled the entire yard and sent chills down every spine. The deputies stepped back instinctively. "Control your animals," Brennan yelled. "They're not mine," Garrett shot back. "They're acting on instinct. Protective instinct." Ghost barked again, a deep, commanding sound that rippled through the pack. Ace snarled not at the officers, but at the injustice in the air. Thunder, still weak from earlier, pulled himself to his feet and pressed his head against the bars, letting out a low, determined growl. The crowd shifted. People started whispering. They're protecting him. They know he's on their side. They're choosing Garrett. A little girl in the crowd tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, the dogs want to go with him." Her words hit harder than any argument. One of the deputies lowered his voice. "Sir, we need to call animal control. This is getting out of hand." "No," the other whispered back. "Look at them. They're terrified of us, but not of Blackwood." Brennan tried one last time. "Officer Blackwood, step away from the cages, or you will be removed." Garrett didn't move. Instead, he knelt down right in front of Ghost's cage and placed his hand on the metal. "I'm here," he said softly, "and I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." Ghost nudged his muzzle against the bars, and in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't just defiance. This was loyalty. Unbreakable, undeniable loyalty. The dogs weren't dangerous. They were choosing their protector, and the officers who saw it no longer knew whose side they were supposed to be on. The standoff held for what felt like an eternity. Garrett on his knees before Ghost's cage hand pressed to the cold metal. The dogs positioned like soldiers' bodies tense, ready to defend. The deputies frozen in place, uncertain, their hands hovering near their belts, but not quite committing. And the crowd silent now, phones raised, recording everything, sensing they were witnessing something that would ripple far beyond this dusty yard in Harris County. Brennan's face had gone pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the dry Texas heat. He gripped his clipboard so tightly the edges crumpled beneath his fingers. The auction was supposed to be simple, routine, a quiet transfer of assets no one would question. But now, with cameras recording and a K-9 officer refusing to back down, everything was unraveling. Officer Blackwood Brennan said, his voice cracking slightly, "You are interfering with official county business. I'm asking you one final time to step away." Garrett didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Ghost. The shepherd's gaze held his brown eyes deep with intelligence and something that looked heartbreakingly close to understanding. Ghost knew what was happening. They all did, and they had chosen Garrett as their last hope. Behind Garrett, the other cages continued to rattle, not with random panic, but with coordinated intensity. Ace slammed his shoulder against the cage door in steady, rhythmic thuds. Rex scraped his claws beneath the bottom edge, testing for weakness. Thunder, despite his earlier collapse, had risen again and pressed his full weight against the bars. They weren't trying to escape randomly. They were working together, creating enough chaos to keep the deputies back. To buy Garrett time. Deputy Callahan stepped closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "Garrett," he said quietly, urgently, "you need to stand down. This isn't going to end well." Garrett finally turned his head just enough to meet Callahan's eyes. "Then make it end well," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me why Van's dogs are in cages. Tell me why their medical records are sealed. Tell me who gave the order to process them if they don't sell." Callahan's jaw worked, his face a mask of conflict. He glanced back at the other officers, then at Brennan, then at the crowd with their cameras. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Not here, not like this." Then where Garrett demanded. When after they're sold, after they're gone, the cage behind him rattled harder. Ghost barked once, sharp and commanding, as if urging Garrett to keep pushing, keep fighting. Callahan ran a hand over his face, the gesture of a man caught between duty and conscience. His shoulders sagged. For a long moment he stood there, the weight of years in law enforcement pressing down on him. Then he made a decision. "Everyone back up," Callahan said loudly, turning to the other deputies. "Give us space." The deputies hesitated, looking to Brennan for guidance. But Brennan had lost control of the situation and everyone knew it. Slowly, reluctantly, they stepped back. Callahan moved to the side of Ghost's cage, positioning himself so his back was to most of the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for Garrett. "These dogs didn't fail their evaluations," he said. "They passed. All of them." Garrett's blood went cold. "Passed," Callahan nodded once, his face grim. "They weren't supposed to retire. Not yet. They had at least 3 more years of service in them." The words landed like a physical blow. Garrett's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. If the dogs passed their evaluations, if they were still fit for duty, then why were they here? Why the forced retirement? Why the secrecy? He turned back to the cages, looking at each dog with new eyes. Ghost pressed against the bars, waiting. Ace still slamming his shoulder rhythmically. Rex watchful and tense. Thunder trembling, but standing. These weren't broken dogs. These were warriors being thrown away for reasons that had nothing to do with their ability to serve. Why, Garrett asked, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Callahan hesitated, then leaned closer. "Look, a new private security contractor approached the county. Summit K9 Solutions. They want to supply fresh K9 units. Young ones. Uninjured. Flashy. The kind that look good in promotional videos." Garrett's jaw clenched. "So the county forced out the older dogs to make room?" "It's not just that." Callahan's voice dropped even lower. "The county gets a commission for each new dog purchased from Summit. Big money. They needed these dogs out of the way to justify the new contracts." The world seemed to tilt beneath Garrett's feet. "You're telling me they pushed out dogs who served for years, who saved lives because someone wanted a paycheck?" Callahan nodded, unable to meet Garrett's eyes. "And the dogs that don't get sold today?" He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. Garrett gripped the fence so hard his knuckles turned white. Van would be sick if he saw this. "We all are," Callahan said, his voice cracking. "But we were told to keep our mouths shut." "Why no medical records?" Garrett asked, his mind working through the implications. Callahan sighed. "Because the records show the truth. They show these dogs didn't fail. They were forced to retire early, and some of them," he gestured toward Thunder, "were injured during Summit's demonstration tests. The county didn't want anyone knowing these dogs were pushed too hard, treated like guinea pigs to show off the contractor's training methods." Garrett turned slowly to look at Thunder. The shepherd sat in his cage, watching with those heartbreaking eyes. And now Garrett understood. The collapse earlier, the trembling, the tears. Thunder wasn't just stressed from the auction. He was traumatized from whatever Summit K9 had put him through. "Let me see him," Garrett said. Callahan glanced around nervously, then pulled out his keys. Against protocol, but screw it, he unlocked Thunder's cage. The door swung open with a metallic creak. Thunder didn't rush out. He moved slowly, cautiously, as though expecting punishment. Garrett knelt down, extending his hand. "Easy, buddy. I'm not going to hurt you." Thunder crept forward, one trembling paw at a time. When he reached Garrett, he pressed his muzzle into Garrett's palm and let out a sound so broken it made several people in the crowd turn away. Garrett ran his hands gently over Thunder's body, checking for injuries. His fingers found fresh scars along the dog's ribs. Burn marks barely healed, hidden beneath the fur. On Thunder's back leg, a surgical scar, recent, maybe 2 months old. "What did they do to you?" Garrett whispered. Thunder's answer was to lean his full weight against Garrett, seeking comfort, seeking safety. Garrett looked up at Callahan. "These scars. They're from the demonstration tests." Callahan nodded grimly. "Summit wanted to show off their dog's ability to work in extreme conditions. Fire scenarios, explosive drills. They pushed too hard. Corners were cut, safety protocols ignored. Some of the dogs got hurt, and the county covered it up. The county wanted the deal to go through. Summit promised millions in contracts. A few injured dogs where Callahan's voice turned bitter, acceptable losses. Garrett felt something inside him break. Not anger, not shock. Betrayal. Deep, suffocating betrayal that made it hard to breathe. These dogs had given everything, and in return they had been used, abused, and discarded. Behind them, Ace began barking frantically, sensing Garrett's rising fury. Rex joined in his bark, sharp and urgent. Ghost slammed both paws against his cage door, the metal rattling violently. The noise crescendoed, a wall of sound that made everyone in the yard stop and turn. And then, without warning, Thunder collapsed. Not a slow sinking to the ground. A full collapse. His legs gave out completely, and he dropped onto his side with a heavy thud that made Garrett's heart stop. Thunder's chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths. His eyes rolled back, showing whites. His whole body convulsed with tremors. No, no, no. Garrett breathed, dropping fully to the ground beside the dog. Thunder, stay with me. But Thunder couldn't hear him. The shepherd was lost in whatever hell his mind had dragged him back to. His paws scrabbled at the air, fighting invisible enemies. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth, and tears, real tears, began pouring from his eyes, streaming down his muzzle and pulling on the concrete below. Someone in the crowd screamed. Others gasped. Phones raised higher, capturing every second. He's having a seizure, someone yelled. It's not a seizure, a voice called out. An older man pushed through the crowd, his veterinarian badge visible on his shirt. That is a severe stress collapse. PTSD response. This dog has been traumatized. The vet knelt beside Garrett, pulling out a stethoscope. Thunder's heart rate is through the roof. He's reliving something terrible. Garrett cradled Thunder's head in his lap, stroking the dog's face gently. You're safe now, he murmured. You're safe, I've got you. But Thunder's body continued to shake. His whimpers grew louder, more desperate. The sound was wrong. Too human. Too full of pain and memory and fear. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the other dogs had stopped barking, as though sensing the gravity of Thunder's breakdown. Ace pressed his face between the bars of his cage, whining softly. Rex paced in tight circles. Ghost stared, unblinking, his ears flat against his skull. This dog needs immediate medical attention, the vet said firmly, looking up at Brennan. He's going into shock. Brennan stood frozen on the platform, his face ashen. We don't have authorization for emergency veterinary care. The crowd erupted. Are you kidding me? That dog is dying. You can't just let him suffer. A woman in the front row, tears streaming down her face, pointed at Brennan. This is abuse. This is animal cruelty. Her words ignited something in the crowd. Anger that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly boiled over. People surged forward, shouting. The deputies moved to create a barrier, hands raised, trying to calm everyone down. But the damage was done. The illusion that this was a normal, acceptable process had shattered completely. Garrett looked up from Thunder's trembling form, his eyes blazing. This, he said, his voice carrying across the yard despite the chaos. This is what your policies created. This is what happens when you treat heroes like equipment. Brennan tried to respond, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd. The vet worked quickly, checking Thunder's vitals, trying to stabilize him. The dog's breathing began to slow, the worst of the episode passing, but he remained limp in Garrett's arms, utterly spent. Callahan crouched beside Garrett. We need to get him to an emergency clinic. The county won't authorize it, Garrett said bitterly. Then I will. Callahan pulled out his radio. This is Deputy Callahan requesting emergency animal transport to county veterinary. Officer down. K-9 unit in medical distress. The radio crackled. Officer down dispatch sounded confused. Callahan's voice hardened. You heard me? Officer down. There was a pause, then copy that. Transport en route. Garrett looked at Callahan with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. Callahan just nodded, his face grim. This has gone too far. As they waited for the transport, Garrett held Thunder, feeling the dog's heartbeat gradually slow to something closer. To normal. The shepherd's eyes finally focused, finding Garrett's face. And in that moment of recognition, Thunder let out a soft, exhausted whine that broke Garrett's heart all over again. I'm here, buddy, Garrett whispered. I'm not leaving you. The crowd had quieted, watching the scene with a mixture of horror and sympathy. Phones still recorded, but the tone had changed. This wasn't entertainment. This was documentation. Evidence. Proof of something deeply wrong. A young woman near the front, her phone raised. I spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is going live. Thousands of people are watching right now. Brennan's face went from pale to green. Ma'am, you need to stop recording. Not a chance, she shot back. The world needs to see this. And she was right. Within minutes, the video had been shared hundreds of times, then thousands. The algorithm picked it up, pushing it to feeds across the county, then the state, then the nation. Hashtag Save the Four began trending. Comments poured in. This is heartbreaking. How is this legal? Those dogs are heroes. Someone needs to investigate Harris County. By the time the emergency transport arrived, a white van with red crosses on the side, the story had gone viral. News vans were already on their way, reporters calling the county offices demanding statements. The quiet little auction that was supposed to go unnoticed had become a national incident. Paramedics carefully loaded Thunder onto a stretcher, the dog too weak to protest. Garrett stood his uniform stained with dirt and tears, Thunder's in his own. He watched as they secured the shepherd, started an IV, prepared to transport. I'm coming with him, Garrett said. Sir. One of the paramedics started regulations. I don't care about regulations. Garrett interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. That dog is a decorated officer who served this county with honor. I'm not leaving him alone. Not again. The paramedic looked at his partner, then nodded. Get in. As Garrett climbed into the van, he turned back to look at the remaining dogs. Ghost Ace and Rex watched from their cages, their eyes following him, trusting him, believing he would come back. I will fix this, Garrett called to them. I promise. The van doors closed. The engine started. And as they pulled away from the auction yard, Garrett made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whoever he had to fight, he would expose the truth. He would save Van's dogs. He would keep his promise. Because some bonds were stronger than death, and some promises were worth any cost. The veterinary emergency clinic was a squat brick building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and a parking lot that had seen better days. By the time they arrived, Thunder had stabilized somewhat, his breathing steady, his heart rate approaching normal. But his eyes remained distant, haunted, as though part of him was still trapped in whatever nightmare the auction had triggered. Garrett stayed by the dog's side as they wheeled him into the examination room. The veterinarian on duty, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and steady hands, worked efficiently checking vitals, drawing blood-running scans. She didn't ask questions at first, just focused on the patient. But when she ran her hands over Thunder's ribs and found the scars, her expression darkened. These are fresh, she said quietly. Burn marks. Chemical burns if I had to guess. And this surgical scar, she indicated, Thunder's back leg. This is from a torn ligament. Recent repair. Maybe 8 weeks old. Garrett's jaw clenched. Can you tell what caused it? The vet examined the scar more closely. Hard to say for certain, but the tear pattern suggests extreme overexertion. Like he was pushed past the point of injury and kept going. She looked up at Garrett. What happened to this dog? He was used in demonstration tests, Garrett said, his voice tight, for a private contractor trying to sell K9 units to the county. The vet's face went hard. Without proper safety protocols. Without any care at all, Garrett said bitterly. She shook her head, disgusted. I'll document everything. These injuries, the trauma response. It all goes in the medical report. And if anyone asks, I'll testify that this dog was subjected to abusive conditions. Thank you, Garrett said quietly. The vet softened slightly. You care about him. He was my partner's dog, Garrett said. My partner died saving my life, and I promised I'd take care of his team. Then you're doing the right thing, the vet said firmly. Whatever fight you're facing, you're on the right side of it. Thunder whimpered softly from the examination table. Garrett moved closer, placing a hand on the dog's head. Easy, boy. You're safe here. The vet prepared a sedative. I'm going to give him something to help him rest. His body needs time to recover from the stress response. You can stay if you want. I'm not going anywhere, Garrett said. As the medication took effect, Thunder's eyes began to droop. But even in his sedated state, his paw stretched toward Garrett, seeking contact, seeking reassurance. Garrett held it gently the way he had held Ghost's paw hours earlier at the auction. "I've got you," Garrett whispered. "All of you." His phone buzzed in his pocket. Multiple notifications, texts, calls, emails. He pulled it out and his screen was flooded with messages. Deputy Callahan had sent a link to the viral video. Garrett clicked it, watching as the scene at the auction played out in compressed digital form. Thunder's collapse, Garrett cradling him, the crowd's outrage. The view count was climbing by the second. Comments poured in faster than he could read them. But one text from Callahan stood out. "You need to see something. County budget records. I'll send you the files." A moment later, Garrett's email pinged. Attached documents, dozens of them labeled with bureaucratic efficiency. Fiscal year K9 acquisitions, contract proposals, budget amendments. Garrett began reading, his anger building with each page. The timeline was damning. 6 months ago, Summit K9 Solutions had approached the county board with a proposal. They would supply fully trained K9 units at competitive prices. Young dogs, strong dogs, dogs that could be featured in promotional materials, public relations campaigns, fundraising events. The county would receive a commission for each dog purchased, $10,000 per unit, with a minimum order of 12 dogs that meant $120,000 flowing directly into county coffers. But there was a problem. The county already had experienced K9 units. Older dogs, yes, but still effective, still passing their evaluations. If the county wanted to justify purchasing new dogs, they needed to clear out the old ones. Garrett found the memo buried in the third attachment, a directive from the county board to the sheriff's department. Expedite retirement evaluations for K9 units over 5 years of age. Prioritize units with prior injury history or behavioral flags. Behavioral flags. The term was so vague it could mean anything or nothing. He kept reading, found the evaluation reports for Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder. Each one had been marked fit for continued service by the original K9 supervisors. But then, a week later, amended reports appeared. Same dogs, different conclusions. Unfit for duty due to age-related decline and behavioral concerns. The signatures on the amended reports didn't match the original supervisors. Someone else had overridden the initial evaluations. Someone with authority, someone with motivation. Garrett's hands shook as he scrolled through the budget records. And there it was, the smoking gun. County Board Chairman Victor Brennan, no relation to the auctioneer, held shares in Summit K9 Solutions. Not a controlling stake, but enough to profit significantly from the contract. Enough to create a conflict of interest so blatant it bordered on criminal. The betrayal ran deeper than Garrett had imagined. This wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence. This was corruption, calculated, deliberate, and the Van's dogs were the ones paying the price. His phone rang. Callahan's name flashed on the screen. "Did you see it?" Callahan asked when Garrett answered. "I saw it." Garrett said, his voice cold. "Chairman Brennan has financial ties to Summit." "More than ties," Callahan said. "I did some digging. His brother-in-law is Summit's CEO. The whole thing is a family operation." Garrett felt sick. So they forced out experienced Ds, falsified evaluations, and hid medical records, all to line their pockets. "Yeah," Callahan said grimly, and anyone who questioned it was shut down. The sheriff tried to push back. The board threatened to cut his budget in half. He had to choose between saving a few dogs and keeping the entire department funded. Garrett understood then why the officers at the auction had looked so uncomfortable. They knew. They all knew. But they were trapped between duty and survival, between what was right and what was possible. "What do we do?" Callahan asked. Garrett looked down at Thunder, sleeping peacefully now, his breathing steady. "We expose them. All of it. The falsified evaluations, the kickbacks, the abuse during the demonstration tests, we burn it all down. That's going to make powerful enemies, Callahan warned. I don't care, Garrett said. Van died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. I'm not going to let his dogs be thrown away because some corrupt politician wanted to get rich. There was a pause on the line. Then Callahan said quietly, I'm with you, whatever you need. Thank you, Garrett said. But you need more than just me, Callahan continued. You need someone with the authority to investigate, someone outside the county system. Internal affairs, Garrett said. Already ahead of you, Callahan replied. I made some calls. There's an IA investigator who's been looking into county K-9 contracts for weeks. Anonymous complaint came in about a month ago. She's been gathering evidence, but she needed someone on the inside willing to talk. Who is she, Garrett asked. Special Agent Sloan Merrick, Callahan said. And according to my sources, she's on her way to the auction yard right now. Garrett felt a surge of hope. If Internal Affairs was already investigating if they had evidence, then maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. Maybe Van's dogs had a chance. I need to get back there, Garrett said, looking at Thunder. But I can't leave him alone. The vet will take care of him, Callahan assured, and I'll have a deputy posted outside the clinic. No one touches that dog without your authorization. Garrett nodded, though Callahan couldn't see it. Okay, I'm heading back. He hung up and turned to the veterinarian. I have to go, he said, but I'll be back as soon as I can. He'll be safe here, the vet promised. And Garrett, she added, whatever you're fighting for, don't stop. These dogs deserve better. Garrett placed a gentle hand on Thunder's head one last time. I'll bring your brothers home, he whispered. I promise. Then he turned and walked out of the clinic, his mind already racing ahead to the confrontation waiting for him back at the auction yard. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every red light, every slow driver, every second of delay made Garrett's frustration grow. His phone continued to buzz with notifications. The viral video had exploded. Mainstream news outlets were picking it up. Local politicians were issuing statements. Animal rights groups were organizing protests. The quiet little auction that was supposed to disappear into bureaucratic obscurity had become a national scandal. And somewhere in county offices, powerful people were scrambling to control the narrative, to bury the evidence, to protect themselves. But they hadn't counted on one thing. They hadn't counted on Garrett Blackwood refusing to let go, refusing to back down, refusing to break his promise to a dead brother. When Garrett pulled into the auction yard parking lot, the scene had transformed. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes extended toward the sky. Protesters had gathered outside the gates holding signs. Save the K-9 heroes, justice for retired police dogs, prosecute the corruption. The crowd had swelled from dozens to hundreds, and at the center of it all, parked near the main gate, was a black SUV with government plates. Internal Affairs had arrived. Garrett parked his patrol vehicle and stepped out. The protesters recognized him immediately. Some applauded, others shouted encouragement. A reporter rushed toward him, microphone extended. Officer Blackwood, can you comment on the allegations of corruption in the K-9 retirement program? Garrett held up a hand. Not now. He pushed through the crowd, heading toward the gate. Deputy Callahan met him there, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. She's inside, Callahan said, gesturing toward the yard. Talking to Brennan right now. Garrett moved past him, his boots crunching on gravel as he entered the yard for the second time that day. The atmosphere had changed completely. The casual indifference was gone, replaced by tension so thick you could taste it. Officers stood in tight clusters, whispering urgently. Brennan was on the platform, his clipboard abandoned, his face red and sweating as he spoke to a woman in a dark suit. Special Agent Sloan Merrick stood with her arms crossed, her badge visible on her belt. She was in her 40s with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Brennan's explanations with an expression of complete skepticism, occasionally jotting notes in a leather-bound notebook. When Garrett approached, she turned to look at him. Her gaze was assessing, taking his measure in seconds. Then she extended a hand. Officer Blackwood, she said. I'm Special Agent Merrick, Internal Affairs Division. I believe we have some things to discuss. Garrett shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Yes, ma'am, we do, Brennan sputtered. Now wait just a minute. This is highly irregular. You can't just shut down an authorized county auction without— I absolutely can, Merrick interrupted, her voice cold and precise. Especially when there's evidence of forced retirements, falsified evaluations, withheld medical records, and financial kickbacks from a private contractor. Gasps rippled through the remaining crowd. Officers exchanged shocked glances. Even those who had suspected corruption seemed stunned to hear it stated so bluntly. Garrett felt a grim satisfaction. The truth was out. Finally, Merrick turned back to him. I got your message, she said quietly. Well, actually, I got Deputy Callahan's message. But I understand you're the one who first raised concerns about these dogs. Garrett nodded. Ghost Ace, Rex, and Thunder. They were my partner's K9 team, Donovan Thorne. He died 3 years ago. These dogs shouldn't be here. Merrick made a note. And you believe their presence at this auction is related to the Summit K9 contract? I know it is, Garrett said. He pulled out his phone, showing her the budget documents Callahan had sent. County Board Chairman has financial ties to Summit. The evaluations were falsified to justify early retirement. The dogs were injured during Summit's demonstration tests. It's all connected. Merrick's eyes scanned the documents, her expression growing harder with each page. She looked up at Brennan. Is this true? Brennan's face had gone from red to pale. I was just following orders. The county board authorized Save It, Merrick cut him off. She turned to the officers. This auction is suspended effective immediately. These dogs are now under the custody of Internal Affairs pending the outcome of our investigation. Relief flooded through Garrett, but Merrick wasn't finished. She walked toward the cages where Ghost Ace and Rex still waited. The 3 dogs watched her approach, wary but not aggressive. Merrick crouched in front of Ghost's cage, studying the shepherd's face. You were Donovan Thorne's primary K9, she said softly. Ghost, right? Ghost's ears perked forward at the sound of Van's name. Merrick stood, her jaw set. She turned back to Garrett and Brennan, her voice ringing across the yard. These dogs show clear signs of emotional trauma and physical abuse. Until I determine who is responsible and what penalties are appropriate, no one touches them. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, Garrett said immediately. Brennan nodded weakly. All fight gone out of him. Merrick pulled out her radio. This is Agent Merrick. I need a full forensic team at the Harris County Sheriff's auction yard. We're executing a hold on all K9 units and seizing county budget records related to Summit K9 Solutions. And get me a warrant for County Board Chairman Victor Brennan's financial records. The radio crackled in acknowledgement. Garrett felt something he hadn't felt since Van died. Hope. Real, tangible hope that justice might actually be possible. Merrick turned back to him. Officer Blackwood, I'm going to need your full cooperation. Statement, documentation, everything you know. You have it, Garrett said. Whatever you need. Good, Merrick said, because I have a feeling this goes deeper than just one auction. She was right, of course. This was bigger than 4 dogs. It was a systematic corruption that had infected the entire county K9 program. And Garrett was going to make sure every single person responsible faced consequences. But first he had a promise to keep. He walked to Ghost's cage, kneeling down to meet the shepherd's eyes. You're coming home, he said quietly. All of you, I don't know how yet, but I will make this right. Ghost pressed his muzzle against the bars, and for the first time that day, his tail gave a small, tentative wag. Behind Garrett, the yard buzzed with activity. Forensic teams arriving, evidence being collected, the machinery of justice slowly grinding into motion. And somewhere in county offices, powerful people were beginning to realize that their carefully constructed scheme was crumbling. That the dogs they had tried to discard quietly had become the center of a storm they couldn't control. The Harris County Board of Supervisors met in emergency session 1 week after the auction. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity, standing room only, with overflow crowds spilling into the hallways and out onto the courthouse steps. News cameras lined the back wall. Reporters scribbled notes. Citizens who had never attended a county meeting in their lives, showed up wearing homemade t-shirts with ghosts' face printed on them. Garrett sat in the front row. His uniform pressed his posture military straight, but his hands were clenched so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white. This was it, the moment that would determine whether Van's dogs came home or disappeared into the bureaucratic machine forever. Agent Sloan Merrick sat beside him, a thick folder of evidence on her lap. Over the past week, her investigation had torn through county records like a wildfire, exposing corruption at every level. County Board Chairman Victor Brennan had been arrested 3 days earlier, his financial ties to Summit Canine Solutions laid bare in a federal indictment. The CEO of Summit, Brennan's brother-in-law, had resigned under pressure. 2 other board members were under investigation. But despite the scandal, despite the evidence, despite the national outrage, the remaining board members had the authority to decide the fate of 4 dogs. And Garrett knew from experience that bureaucrats protecting their own interests could be more dangerous than any armed criminal he had ever faced. The board chairman pro tem, a thin man in his 60s named Howard Mitchell, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The room fell silent. We are here today to consider the petition of Officer Garrett Blackwood for custody of 4 retired K-9 units currently held in county facilities. Howard announced, his voice carrying the dry precision of a man who had spent decades in administrative hearings. Officer Blackwood, you may present your case. Garrett stood, every eye in the room fixed on him. He had prepared a speech, bullet points on note cards in his pocket. But when he opened his mouth, the prepared words evaporated. What came out instead was pure, unfiltered truth. 7 board members sat before him. Some he recognized. Others were strangers appointed in the chaos following the arrests. Their faces were carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Members of the board, Garrett began, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. 3 years ago, my partner, Officer Donovan Thorne, was killed in the line of duty. He died protecting me and his fellow officers. His last words were a request: take care of them. He wasn't talking about his family, though I've done that too. He was talking about his K-9 team, Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder. He paused, letting the names settle in the room. For 3 years, I believe those dogs were safe, living with foster families, retired with honor. But 1 week ago, I discovered them in cages at an auction being sold like used equipment. They had been forced into early retirement despite passing their evaluations. Their medical records had been falsified. They had been injured during demonstration tests for a contractor paying kickbacks to county officials. And they were going to be processed, euthanized if no one bought them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Howard rapped his gavel for silence. These dogs, Garrett continued, served this county with distinction. They saved lives, they ran into danger without hesitation. They earned the right to live out their remaining years with dignity and care. I am here today to request that this board grant me full custody of all 4 dogs. I have secured funding veterinary support in a sanctuary property where they can live together. I am asking you to do what's right. He sat down. The room erupted in applause. Howard banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Thank you, Officer Blackwood, Howard said. Agent Merrick, I understand you have testimony to provide. Sloan stood crisp and professional in her dark suit. Yes, sir. Internal Affairs has conducted a thorough investigation into the county K-9 program. What we found was systematic corruption designed to financially benefit certain individuals at the expense of the dogs and taxpayers. The 4 dogs in question were subjected to abusive conditions, forced into early retirement against protocol, and nearly disposed of to hide evidence of wrongdoing. She opened her folder, pulling out photographs. These are medical records showing injuries sustained during Summit K-9's demonstration tests. Burns, torn ligaments, untreated trauma. The dogs were pushed beyond safe limits to impress county officials. She laid the photos on the table in front of the board members. Several looked away. One, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, picked up a photo and stared at it for a long moment, her face hardening. Separating these dogs now would cause irreparable psychological harm. Merrick continued, they are a bonded pack. They have experienced trauma together. They trust each other. Breaking that bond would be cruel and medically inadvisable. I recommend the board approve Officer Blackwood's petition. She sat down. The room waited. Howard looked to his fellow board members. Discussion. A man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the county hearing room leaned forward. His nameplate read Supervisor Michaels. I appreciate Officer Blackwood's dedication, he said, his voice smooth, practiced. But we're talking about significant liability here. What happens if one of these dogs, traumatized as they are, injures someone? The county would be responsible. With all due respect, Garrett interrupted, standing again. The county wouldn't be responsible. I would be. I'm requesting full legal custody. All liability transfers to me. Michaels didn't look convinced. These are damaged animals. The county has limited resources. We cannot justify expensive accommodations for dogs that are no longer fit for service. They were fit for service until you force them out. Garrett shot back, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. Howard banged his gavel. Order, please. But the damage was done. Garrett could see it in the board members' faces. The calculation, the risk assessment. They weren't seeing Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder. They were seeing liability, expense, political exposure. The board will now vote, Howard announced. All in favor of granting custody to Officer Blackwood. 3 hands went up. The woman with the gray hair, a younger man who had been taking notes throughout the hearing, and a third supervisor Garrett didn't recognize. All opposed 4 hands rose. Michaels and 3 others. Garrett's heart sank like a stone. The petition is denied, Howard said, and the words landed like a death sentence. The dogs will be transferred to state facilities for evaluation and potential rehoming through appropriate channels. The room erupted. Shouts of protest, boos, people standing yelling at the board. Howard banged his gavel uselessly, his calls for order drowned in the chaos. Garrett sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. He had fought so hard, exposed the corruption, gathered the evidence, and it hadn't been enough. Merrick put a hand on his shoulder. This isn't over, she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. Garrett looked at her, his eyes hollow. What else is there? Public pressure, she said. We make this so toxic they have to reverse the decision. And if they don't, Garrett asked, what happens to the dogs? Merrick didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew. State facilities meant bureaucracy, delays, evaluations that could take months. And for traumatized dogs with medical issues, the outcome was rarely good. Garrett stood and pushed his way through the crowd toward the exit. Behind him, protesters were chanting, "Save the 4, save the 4. The words followed him out of the courthouse and into the parking lot where news crews swarmed. Officer Blackwood, how do you feel about the board's decision? Will you continue to fight? What's next for Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder? Garrett ignored them all, climbing into his patrol vehicle and driving away. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out what Van would have done in this situation. But Van was gone, and Garrett had never felt more alone. The story exploded across social media within hours. The viral video from the auction had already made Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder into symbols. Now, with the board's rejection of Garrett's petition, they became martyrs. Proof that the system didn't care about heroes, human or canine, once they were no longer useful. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag Save the 4 became hashtag Justice for the 4. Then hashtag Harris County Corruption. Local story became state news, became national outrage. Cable news picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Celebrities tweeted about it. The 4 German shepherds who had nearly been sold off quietly at a dusty auction became the most famous police dogs in America. Protests erupted outside the Harris County Courthouse. Not dozens of people, hundreds, then thousands. They came from neighboring counties, neighboring states, retired law enforcement, veterans, dog lovers, people who had never been politically active in their lives showed up with handmade signs in righteous anger. Online petitions circulated. The first one demanding the board reverse its decision gathered 50,000 signatures in 24 hours. By the end of the week, it had 250,000. Politicians began paying attention. The governor's office issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern about the situation and promising to monitor developments. Local businesses got involved. A veterinary clinic offered free lifetime care for all 4 dogs. A pet supply company pledged to donate food equipment, anything needed. A construction firm volunteered to build proper facilities at Garrett's property, no charge. The community rallied in ways Garrett had never imagined possible. But while the movement built momentum, the dogs remained in county custody, locked in kennels at a facility on the outskirts of town. Garrett visited them every day, bringing treats, spending hours just sitting with them, trying to provide some comfort. Ghost would press against the chain link, whining softly. Ace would lean into Garrett's hand when he reached through to pet him. Rex would watch with those intelligent eyes, as if asking when they could go home. And Thunder, still recovering from his collapse, would rest his head in Garrett's palm and sigh. "I'm working on it," Garrett would tell them. "I promise I'm working on it." But promises felt hollow when he couldn't deliver. On the 4th day after the board's decision, Garrett's phone rang at 2 in the morning. The caller ID showed the county veterinary facility. His heart stopped. "This is Blackwood," he answered, already reaching for his boots. "Officer Blackwood, this is Dr. Sarah Williams, the overnight vet at the facility. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a situation with Thunder." Garrett's blood ran cold. What kind of situation? "The infection from his old injury has flared up. It's bad. He needs emergency surgery or we could lose him." Garrett was already out the door, truck keys in hand. "I'm on my way. Do whatever you need to do. I'll cover the cost." Sir Dr. Williams said gently, "The estimate is around $18,000. The county won't authorize that kind of expense for a dog that's already been designated for transfer." Garrett didn't hesitate. "I said I'll cover it. Start the surgery. I'll have the money to you within the hour." "Are you sure that's a significant do it?" Garrett interrupted. "Save him." He hung up and called his bank, authorizing the transfer of nearly everything in his savings account. Money he had been putting away for years. Money for emergencies, for retirement, and for the future. None of that mattered now. Thunder needed help, and Garrett had made a promise. By the time he reached the facility, Thunder was already in surgery. Dr. Williams met him in the waiting room, her scrubs spotted with blood. "The infection had spread to the bone," she explained. "We're doing everything we can, but it's going to be close." Garrett nodded, unable to speak. He sank into a plastic chair and waited, watching the clock tick through the longest 3 hours of his life. At 5:30 in this morning, Dr. Williams emerged, pulling off her surgical mask. Her face was exhausted but relieved. "He made it," she said. "The surgery was successful. He'll need weeks of recovery and physical therapy, but he's going to be okay." Garrett felt something break inside him. Not grief this time. Relief so intense it physically hurt. "Thank you," he managed. Dr. Williams sat down beside him. "Can I be honest with you, Officer Blackwood?" "Of course. I've been a veterinarian for 23 years. I've seen a lot of animals come through these doors, but I've never seen anyone fight for dogs the way you're fighting for these 4. What you're doing, it matters. Don't give up." Garrett looked at her, this woman who had just spent 3 hours saving Thunder's life at 2 in the morning. "I won't," he said. "I can't." He stayed until Thunder woke from anesthesia, groggy and confused but alive. Garrett held the dog's paw through the cage bars the way he had at the auction, the way he had at the clinic. Thunder's eyes found his, and something in that gaze, trust maybe, or hope, or just simple recognition, made Garrett renew his vow. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would bring them home. The news of Thunder's emergency surgery spread as quickly as everything else in this story. Someone at the facility leaked it to the press. By noon, it was everywhere. Officer drains life savings to save retired police dog. County refused to help. The optics were devastating for the county board. Protesters doubled outside the courthouse. The petition signatures climbed toward 300,000. State legislators began calling for investigations. The Attorney General announced a review of county K-9 policies statewide. And then something unexpected happened. On the sixth day after the board's decision, a car pulled up to Garrett's house. Not a news van, not a protester. A modest sedan, slightly dusty, driven by a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair and Van's eyes. Garrett stepped onto the porch, his heart lurching. Lisa Thorne, Van's widow, got out of the car slowly. They hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Grief had driven them apart, each unable to bear the reminder of what they'd lost. But now she stood in his driveway, her face lined with the sorrow that had never fully healed. "I saw the news," she said quietly, "about the D's, about what you're doing." Garrett nodded, not trusting his voice. "Van loved those dogs," Lisa continued. She moved closer, her eyes meeting his. "He loved them almost as much as he loved me. And when he died, I thought they would be taken care of. I thought the county would do right by them." "They didn't," Garrett said bitterly. "No," Lisa agreed. "But you are." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "After Van died, his life insurance paid out. I've been living off it, trying to figure out what to do with myself, how to move forward. But I realized something. Van would want this money to help his dogs. So I'm giving you half." Garrett stared at the envelope, shocked. "Lisa, I can't." "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "Those dogs saved Van's life more times than I can count. They earned this, and I know he would approve." She pressed the envelope into his hands. Inside was a check for $75,000. "This is too much," Garrett protested. "It's not nearly enough," Lisa said. "Not for what they gave, not for what you're doing." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank you, Garrett, for keeping his promise when no one else would." She turned to leave, but Garrett called after her. "Lisa, wait. Do you want to see them, the dogs?" She stopped her back to him. "I don't know if I can handle it." "They'd want to see you," Garrett said gently. "And I think it might help. For all of you." Lisa was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, yes, I'd like that." The county facility wasn't set up for visitors, but Garrett had enough goodwill with the staff that they made an exception. He led Lisa through the building to the kennels where Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder were housed. The dogs noticed her immediately. Ghost's ears perked forward. Ace stood his body tense alert. Rex moved to the front of his kennel, and Thunder, still recovering from surgery, lifted his head from his bed. Lisa approached Ghost's kennel slowly, her hand trembling as she extended it. The big shepherd pressed his nose against her palm, breathing deeply, taking in her scent. And then suddenly his tail began to wag. Slowly at first, then faster, more urgent. A whine built in his throat, not of pain, but of recognition. "He remembers me," Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ghost pushed his whole body against the chain link, trying to get closer. The other dogs began to react, their agitation growing not aggressive but desperate. They knew this scent. They knew this person. This was Van's person, and she had come back. Lisa sank to her knees in front of Ghost's kennel, pressing her forehead against the metal. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. I should have checked on you." Ghost whined, pawing at the barrier between them. Garrett unlocked the kennel. Ghost burst out and immediately pressed himself against Lisa, nearly knocking her over. He circled her, whining, licking her face, his whole body wiggling with desperate joy. The other dogs barked from their kennels, wanting the same reunion. One buck and Garrett released them. Ace came next, moving to Lisa with surprising gentleness for such a powerful dog. Then Rex, who simply sat beside her, leaning his weight against her side. And finally Thunder, limping, but determined, who rested his head in her lap and sighed deeply. Lisa sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by 4 German shepherds, crying and laughing simultaneously, running her hands over their fur, whispering Van's name, telling them stories they couldn't understand but seemed to feel. Garrett watched from a distance, giving them space, giving them time. This was healing for Lisa, for the Dean, for the ghost of Van that still haunted all of them. After an hour, Lisa finally composed herself enough to stand. The dogs stayed close, reluctant to let her leave. "Bring them home, Garrett," she said, her voice steady now. "Whatever it takes, use the money, fight the system, do what Van would have done." "I will," Garrett promised. For the second time in a week, he made that vow, and this time he meant to move heaven and earth to keep it. The county board reconvened for an emergency session 2 days later. The pressure had become unsustainable. Protests blocked traffic. Petitions overwhelmed their offices. State and federal investigators were circling, and the public relations nightmare showed no signs of abating. The hearing room was even more packed than before. Every seat taken, every inch of standing room occupied. And this time Lisa Thorne sat beside Garrett in the front row, her presence a silent rebuke to the board that had failed her husband's legacy. Howard called the meeting to order, his face haggard. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. We are here to reconsider the petition of Officer Garrett Blackwood regarding custody of 4 retired K-9 units. Before anyone could speak, the doors at the back of the room opened. Governor's office, someone whispered. A representative from the state capitol walked down the aisle and handed Howard an official-looking document. Howard read it, his face going pale. He cleared his throat. The board has received a formal recommendation from the governor's office that we approve Officer Blackwood's petition in the interest of justice and appropriate recognition of the dog's service. It wasn't an order. The governor couldn't legally force a county board decision, but the implication was clear. Approve the petition or face consequences. The board members looked at each other. The political calculation had shifted. Opposing Garrett now meant opposing the governor, the public, and basic decency. All in favor of granting custody to Officer Blackwood, Howard asked, his voice flat. 6 hands went up. Only Michaels abstained, his face set in stubborn disapproval. The petition is approved, Howard announced. Custody of K-9 units. Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder is hereby granted to Officer Garrett Blackwood, effective immediately. The room exploded in cheers. People hugged. Some cried. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. Garrett sat motionless, unable to believe it was finally over. Lisa squeezed his hand. You did it, she whispered. Van would be so proud. Garrett nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He had won. After weeks of fighting, exposing corruption, draining his savings, refusing to give up, he had finally won. The dogs were coming home. The county facility processed the transfer paperwork within hours, eager to be rid of the political liability. Garrett arrived with a borrowed van large enough to transport all 4 dogs. Staff members who had been caring for them came out to say goodbye, some wiping tears from their eyes. Dr. Williams was there checking Thunder's surgical site one last time. He's healing well, she told Garrett. Keep up the antibiotics for another 2 weeks and he should make a full recovery. Thank you, Garrett said, for everything. She smiled. Thank me by giving them the life they deserve. One by one, the kennels were open. Ace bounded out, first tail wagging, heading straight for the van as if he knew exactly what was happening. Rex followed, moving with quiet dignity. Thunder limped out more slowly, but his eyes were bright alert. And then there was Ghost. The kennel door swung open, but Ghost didn't move. He sat in the back corner of the kennel, staring at Garrett with those deep brown eyes, his body tense, trembling slightly. Come on, buddy, Garrett said, gently crouching down. It's okay. You're going home. But Ghost didn't budge. The other dogs had loaded into the van, but Ghost remained frozen, unable or unwilling to cross the threshold. Garrett felt a cold spike of fear. What's wrong? He asked Dr. Williams. She knelt beside him, observing Ghost carefully. PTSD. Response, she said quietly. He's been through so much. The auction, the separation, being locked up again. He's terrified that if he leaves this kennel, something bad will happen, or that you'll leave him. The realization hit Garrett like a punch. Ghost wasn't being stubborn. He was traumatized. Too many times people had come for him, promised him safety, then disappeared. His handler van had died and never came back. Foster families had failed to materialize. The auction had terrified him. And now, even though freedom was just a few feet away, Ghost couldn't make himself believe it was real. Garrett made a decision. He crawled into the kennel, sitting down beside Ghost in the small concrete space. The big shepherd looked at him, confused. I'm not leaving you, Garrett said softly. I'm right here. and I'm not going anywhere without you. Ghost's ears twitched. He leaned slightly toward Garrett, seeking contact but still afraid. Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out something he had carried every day since Van died. A small metal badge, Van's K9 handler badge. The official one had been buried with Van, but this was his personal one, the one he wore on his civilian jacket, the one that said he was proud to work with dogs. Van wanted you to have this, Garrett said, holding it up so Ghost could see it. He told me to take care of you, all of you, and that means your family now. Do you understand? You're not going to be abandoned again. You're not going to be sold. You're coming home. He attached the badge carefully to Ghost's collar, his fingers gentle. The shepherd watched him, something shifting in his expression, recognition, understanding, maybe even trust. There, Garrett whispered. Now you carry him with you. Always. Ghost looked down at the badge hanging from his collar, then back up at Garrett. And slowly, achingly, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Garrett's chest. The dam broke. Years of grief, confusion, fear, and loss poured out of Ghost in a sound that was part whine, part cry, part howl. His whole body shook as he finally allowed himself to break, to grieve, to release everything he had been holding inside. Garrett wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him tight. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. They sat like that for a long time. Ghost crying into Garrett's chest, Garrett holding a dog who had lost everything and somehow found the strength to hope again. When Ghost finally calmed his breathing steady, his body relaxed. Garrett stood. Come on, buddy, let's go home, together. This time Ghost followed. Step by step out of the kennel across the facility floor into the sunshine outside. The other dogs barked excitedly from the van welcoming their brother. And Ghost Van's dog, the one who had held on longest, finally climbed in to join them. Garrett closed the van doors and climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, he could see all 4 dogs settling in for the ride. Ghost had positioned himself right behind Garrett's seat, his nose pressed against the metal mesh, keeping watch. Garrett started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Behind them, the county facility grew smaller. Ahead, the road stretched toward home. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. What had once been a rundown property on the outskirts of Harris County was now Blackwood K9 Sanctuary. Rolling fields stretched out in every direction, broken up by shade trees and training equipment. A newly constructed barn housed veterinary facilities, grooming stations, and comfortable sleeping quarters. The whole property hummed with life and purpose. Garrett stood on the porch of the main house, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Below him in the main field, 4 German shepherds ran and played with an energy that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Ace led the pack, his powerful body moving with confidence and joy. The burns from the demonstration tests had healed, leaving scars hidden beneath his fur, but no longer causing pain. He had become the alpha of the small pack, protective and proud. Rex trotted beside him, nose to the ground, always tracking, always alert. The scent games Garrett set up for him had restored his confidence, reminded him that his skills still mattered. He moved with purpose, every inch the professional he had been trained to be. Thunder bounded after them both, his limp barely noticeable now. The surgery had been successful, the physical therapy grueling but effective. He would never be the fearless dog who ran into fires without hesitation, but he had found a new kind of courage. The courage to trust again, to play again, to live without constant fear. And Ghost. Ghost stayed close to the porch, close to Garrett, always within sight, always within reach. But his tail wagged now. His eyes were bright, and when Garrett called his name, Ghost's whole body wiggled with happiness. The sanctuary had become more than just a home for 4 dogs. Word had spread. Other counties had reached out asking if Garrett could take their retired K9S animal shelters called about German shepherds with behavioral issues dogs that reminded Garrett too much of Ghost, Ace, Rex, and Thunder to turn away. The property now housed 12 dogs, each one with a story, each one saved from a system that had failed them, and each one slowly healing under Garrett's care. Volunteers came regularly. Deputy Callahan stopped by twice a week to help with training and exercises. Dr. Williams made house calls monitoring the dog's health, providing care at cost. Lisa visited monthly, bringing Van's photos, telling stories, sitting with the ghost for hours, while the shepherd rested his head in her lap. Local schools organized field trips. Children who had seen the viral videos came to meet the heroes in person. Garrett watched as traumatized dogs who had forgotten how to trust learned to accept gentle pets from small hands, learned that not all humans were cruel, learned that the world could still be kind. The community that had rallied to save 4 dogs now supported something bigger, a movement, a recognition that the animals who served alongside officers deserved better than being discarded when they aged. Bills were introduced in the state legislature. Policies changed. Other counties established their own retirement programs, modeling them after what Garrett had built. And through it all, Ghost remained Garrett's shadow. The bond between them had deepened into something profound, something that went beyond handler and home, beyond owner and pet. They were brothers, bonded by shared grief, by promises kept by a fallen man who had loved them both. On this particular morning, as the sun climbed higher and the day began, in earnest, Garrett set down his coffee and descended the porch steps. Ghost immediately trotted to his side, falling into perfect heel position without being commanded. Old habits, old training, old loyalty. The other dogs noticed and came running, surrounding Garrett in a circle of wagging tails and happy panting. Garrett laughed, something he did more often now, and roughhoused with them for a few minutes before settling them down. "Come on," he said, heading toward his truck. "We're going somewhere special today." The dogs loaded into the specially modified vehicle, each taking their usual spot. Garrett drove 20 minutes to a small cemetery on a hillside overlooking the county. He parked near a section with a clear view of the valley below and led the dogs to a specific grave. Donovan Thorne, beloved husband, dedicated officer hero. The headstone was simple granite, weathered slightly by 3 years of sun and rain. Someone had left fresh flowers recently. Lisa, probably. Garrett knelt in front of the grave. The dogs arranged themselves around him, quiet and respectful, as if they understood the significance of this place. Ghost sat pressed against Garrett's right side, Ace on his left, Rex and Thunder just behind. "Hey, Van," Garrett said quietly. "Brought the boys to see you." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers and fresh grass. "They're doing well, better than well, actually." Garrett ran his hand over Ghost's head, feeling the K9 badge still attached to the dog's collar. Thunder had surgery, but he pulled through. Tough as ever, Ace is keeping everyone in line. Rex is teaching the new dogs how to track. And Ghost, he paused, his voice catching slightly. Ghost is right where he belongs, with family. Ghost nudged Garrett's hand as if offering comfort. "I kept my promise," Van Garrett continued. "All of them are home, safe, loved. And I'm going to make sure no other K9 ends up in a cage ever again. We're building something here, something that matters, something you'd be proud of." He sat there for a long time, telling Van about the sanctuary, about the dogs they'd saved, about Lisa's visits, about the small victories and ongoing challenges. The dogs listened patiently, their presence a comfort. When Garrett finally stood to leave, Ghost didn't move immediately. The shepherd approached Van's headstone and sat in front of it, staring at the engraved name. Then softly, almost hesitantly, Ghost tilted his head back and howled. Not the anguished cry from the auction, not the heartbroken wail from the kennel. This was different. Mournful, yes, but also peaceful. A goodbye, an acknowledgement, a letting go. The other dogs joined in, their voices rising in harmony. 4 German shepherds singing for their fallen handler, honoring the man who had loved them, thanking him for the brotherhood he had built. When the howling faded, Ghost returned to Garrett's side and looked up at him with clear, calm eyes. Ready to leave, ready to move forward. Garrett felt tears on his cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. "Goodbye, Van," he whispered. "We'll be back soon." They walked back to the truck together, the 5 of them, a pack bound by loss and love and promises kept. As Garrett drove back toward the sanctuary, Ghost rested his chin on Garrett's shoulder, a position he'd claimed as his own over the past months. In the rearview mirror, Garrett could see the other dogs settling in for the ride, their eyes bright, their bodies relaxed. They weren't broken anymore. They weren't scared. They were home. The sun climbed higher as they drove, painting the Texas landscape in golden shadow. Ahead, the sanctuary waited, a place of healing and second chances. Behind them, a grave on a hillside held the memory of a man whose love had been strong enough to transcend death. And between those 2 points, in a truck filled with Oz who had survived the unthinkable, rode Garrett Blackwood. No longer just a canine officer, now a sanctuary owner, a protector of forgotten heroes, a man who had learned that keeping promises to the dead was how you honored the living. Ghost shifted slightly, his weight a comfortable pressure against Garrett's shoulder. Through the open window, the Texas wind carried the scent of grass and sunshine and possibility. The radio played softly, the engine hummed, and 4 dogs who had nearly been lost forever rode toward home together where they belonged. In the months and years that followed, the sanctuary would grow. More dogs would be saved. More stories would be written. But this moment, this simple drive back from a cemetery with 4 German shepherds who had chosen to trust again, this was the moment that mattered most. Because this was the moment when broken became healed, when lost became found, when promises became reality, and when 4 retired heroes finally truly came home.